Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in to another episode of EDiscovery After Hours. My guest today was Crystal O'Donnell from Heuristica Discovery Counsel. We talked about ice wine and the regions that produce it. We talked about her art habit and all of the media that she is involved with. And then we got into some of her business and how they got started and the areas that they focus on. Awesome conversation. The thing that I love about doing this podcast is meeting people that I haven't previously met and spoken with before. We actually, once recording stopped, we spoke for longer than the episode went on. She's a truly wonderful and lovely person. We had an awesome conversation. So get yourself a glass of ice wine and thanks for tuning in. Today's sponsor is Discovery Master. When you've got document review projects in relativity, whether you have multiple projects in the same instance, or multiple instances. If you want one login to track everything, check out www.discoverymaster.co. Thanks for tuning in.
Quick time!
You don't know how to drink, your whole generation.
Drinks on the house.
Yes, sir.
No, wait a second. Drinks are 50% off.
Right.
No, wait a second. Double the price of everything.
And I work only 16 hours a day.
A union man only works 8 hours a day.
I belong to 2 unions.
And now, EDiscovery After Hours with your host, Ryan Short.
Okay, Crystal, thank you for joining me on EDiscovery After Hours. Cheers.
Cheers to you.
All right.
Great reason to start drinking at 4 o'clock.
Indeed. What are we drinking?
So we are, and you'll notice I paused to let it swirl. So I've chosen ice wine.
Yes.
Because it's a very Canadian thing.
Yeah.
And there's actually only 2 regions in the world where they make it.
Okay. And those regions are?
Germany, but most people in Ontario would say that the Germans don't make proper ice wine. Actually, so it's not the Niagara region of Ontario. And so ice wine is, although it's wine, I think I prefer to think of it as a wine liqueur.
Yeah.
It's very thick, it's very sweet.
Yes.
And it's intended to be with dessert, although if you're like me, I consider it the nectar of the gods, and I will drink it at any time. So ice wine, they actually have to leave the grapes on the vine until they're frozen. And so I actually just looked up the conversion because I know it's minus 10 Celsius.
Yeah.
And so the Fahrenheit is 17.6 Fahrenheit. So they actually have to wait for the grapes to freeze. And then they pick them and press them while they're frozen. So that also explains why, I'm sure you've noticed, it's very expensive.
It's not cheap. So I didn't know what ice wine was, and I had to Google it. And I Googled the 17.4 degrees or whatever that was. I learned that. And I walked in to the store today to get this. My kind of routine whenever I record these episodes is, at lunchtime, I run around to the corner store and pick up whatever the guest has chosen. And I walk in and I was like, yeah, did you guys have any ice wine? And the guy looks at me and he's like, wow, yeah, I think we have 1 or 2. And then he starts talking about how it's becoming super rare. And he said that Germany is the biggest, the German region is the biggest producing region in the world. But he said that a couple of years ago, they didn't produce any. And he's like, global warming is affecting ice wine and all this stuff. And I'm just standing there man, I just Googled what ice wine was. And he's delivering this soliloquy. And I'm like, man, it's 12:30. I got to get back to the office. Do you have?
Yeah. Ontario makes it every year. And so generally speaking, in the Niagara regions, it's usually around, it's overnight when they pick them. So November-ish.
Yeah.
And so it's always that balance between, is it cold enough versus have the grapes been left on for too long and now they're rotted.
Yeah.
So one of the tricks to ice wine, though, is that if I don't drink Scotch, but for Scotch drinkers, take a very tiny sip and let it swirl in your mouth until it's So you swallowed too soon.
I swallowed too soon. Don't worry. I'll do another.
So
I'm committed.
if you keep it in your mouth until it warms up, you start to taste all of the different flavors.
Yes, I did. Wow, that was cool.
So you can learn a thing or two from a Canadian.
Yeah, well, hey, my Nana, who's still living, she's 90 years old. She has Grandma Canada. So she's very, she's like, we are Canadian. I'm like, I mean, kind of like you are half Canadian, right? But so she would be very pleased. I'll have to call her tonight and tell her that I'm getting in touch with the kinfolk.
That's right. Where in Canada?
Yeah, Mayo, Quebec.
Okay, excellent.
So I've never been. I have been to County Mayo in Ireland, but never been to Mayo, Quebec. Evidently named as such because like the rocky and hospitable terrain remind the Irish immigrants of where they came from. So I guess there you go. I don't know.
I've not been there either in Quebec. Where do you know what area it is?
No, I don't. I know I could Google it, but
I'll check it out. Quebec is. I'm wondering if it's around the Gaspé Peninsula, but.
When I have you on season 2, when we get together live, we'll do a live on location. It'll be a big
excellent.
So whereabouts in Canada are you from and where are you now?
So I am from Toronto, and that is actually where I am now. And
Okay.
So I was born here, lived here most of my life, though I have moved for when we were young, and I moved for law school. I lived in Kingston, Ontario, which is about a 3-hour drive east of Toronto.
Yeah.
So
So
other than that, born and bred.
the only thing, I don't know much about Toronto. I've been to Ontario a few times. I don't know much about Toronto, but what I know is that you guys are like in a race with Houston or Chicago or something. You're ratcheting up the North American, like biggest cities in North America. And there was this rivalry for a little while. And people were
We
talking
are
about like,
Chicago. We're neck and neck, and so every year or so we swap places for the third largest city in North America.
okay, that is. See, I knew it rang a bell. So I spent 6 years in Chicago, and my only experience with dessert wine, which is what I learned ice wine is my buddy and I used to go up on the rooftop of his building, and we would pour a nice tawny port and have a cigar. And
Nice.
we talk about one day, when we conquer the world and we're these titans of business. And now I'm working in this weird little niche called EDiscovery, and I've lost track of what he's doing. But we're not titans of it. We're not titans of industry yet.
Exactly. Yet.
Oh my goodness, I love it. All right, so Crystal, the extent of my research for these, that's a very generous term. The extent of my preparation for these episodes is basically, I'm not on social media except for LinkedIn, which you kind of have to be when you're in business development. So I look at LinkedIn and then I do some Googling and see if there's any, news pieces or whatever else pops up. So you are incredibly involved across different organizations in the industry. I want later to get in to talk a little bit about the practice that you launched in 2015 and the things that you guys are doing there. But for those who haven't had the chance to meet you or know about you all that much, who are you outside of the office, aside from take off your EDiscovery hat, right? And what do we find you doing when you're not ingrained in this world?
I am actually an artist.
Oh.
And so I started undergrad fully expecting that I was going to be a professional artist and or art teacher. And then partway through first year, believe it or not, because my family couldn't believe it, I started taking some economic classes.
Yeah.
And economic policy, like the macroeconomics and the policy, legal policy, just triggered my left brain, got all excited. And I switched my majors from visual arts to economics.
That is a big shift.
My family was, did a double take. It was like, seriously?
Yeah.
And, I think at the time, well, and still to this day, I didn't need a degree in art to do art.
Mm-hmm.
If I wanted to do something in business, I was going to need a degree in fine arts was not going to get me there.
Yeah. So what media, if I'm using the term properly, are you, painter, sculptor, watercolorist? What is the?
Yeah, so primarily paint, and in painting, primarily oil painting.
Okay.
I do dabble with other painting mediums, but oil is my favorite, I think, because it's actually the most forgiving. Watercolor is really difficult, and it dries. So do you paint at all, or are you familiar?
No, so my wife is a fairly talented artist.
Okay.
So she does a lot with pencil, colored pencil. So our three daughters, we do like the typical 3 month, 6 month, 9 month, 12-month portrait, right? And so she typically takes something from either their 9 month or their 12-month portrait session, and then she does a version. She draws,
Nice.
version of it, and then we frame it and hang it on the wall, and it's gorgeous. And unfortunately, it takes way too many hours. But I'm like, man, there's a business to be had in here. And then you look at how many hours it takes her to do it. I'm like, there's no business to be had here.
I was just going to say, until you realize how long it takes,
Yeah.
what you actually can sell art for.
No.
So oil painting, because the paint takes so long to dry, it's actually very forgiving. So you can wipe it off.
Oh.
Right. So if you paint something and you're like, oh, that doesn't quite work, you can actually just wipe it off. Or once it's dry, you can paint over it. I think that's, I also just like the texture of it is very different than anything else. And I also do a lot of photography. And there have been times in my life where I've done it, I would never say professional, but I've sold some work. So I guess you could say it's semi-professional.
Yeah.
I've sold greeting cards, and I used to do family photo shoots.
Right.
And I dabble with sculpture, but that's really, really dabbling. And in the last year and a bit, I've actually started to make jewelry.
Really? So, okay, so your creativity knows no bounds.
I will dabble with anything creative.
that's
If
really
it works, it works. If it doesn't, then at least I had fun trying.
Yeah, I love that. Now, is your home, do you have, Crystal O'Donnell originals hanging around surrounding you?
I do, actually. I have a few in my house, and I have a couple in my office as well. And I think the funniest one I have in my office, I wish I had a picture of it, but I'll email it to you. I'll take a picture of it and email it to you, because I did a version of, believe it or not, dogs playing poker. And somebody says, why in the world would you paint dogs playing poker? And so the year that I painted it was probably, I'm going to say 10 or 12 years ago now. I was sort of, what do I want to paint? What do I want to paint? And a friend of mine suggested paint dogs playing poker. And my response was, WTF, why in the world would I paint dogs playing poker? And they said, what do you know about it? And I said, it's bad 60s, 70s black velvet basement art.
Yeah.
And they challenged me, and they said, Google it and get back to me. So I said, okay. Turns out that Dogs Playing Poker was an ad campaign in the 1800s of a cigar company. And the artist, A.J. Coolidge, I may have that name, it's either Coolidge or Coolridge.
Yeah.
There are the originals sold at auction in New York for over 300,000 US.
Oh my gosh.
And so upon learning all of that, I thought, okay, I have a different appreciation for dogs playing poker. So I made my own version. And interestingly, in most of the original, the bulldog is cheating. So in my painting, I've got a bulldog that's giving a skunk eye, and he's got a card underneath the table.
That's so funny.
But
I would have
it was just
never
fun.
done.
I would have never, I think like most people thought dogs playing poker was, like those bad basement art.
Yeah. Wow, that's funny. Okay. All right. Good to know. Duly noted. When people talk about how this is a, collector's item and it's sold for X, Y, or Z, I'm like, yeah, but now we have these people creating these crypto NFTs, which just looks like, the old MS Paint, a bad version of that. And it's like, oh, this token sold for X amount of millions of dollars. And I'm like, I've chosen so many wrong paths in life, evidently, when I compare myself to that. Right. It's just, what are you going to do?
My retirement goal is, at some point when I get there in my 60s, I don't want to do law for the rest of my life, is to actually own an art gallery wine bar. And my thought behind it is, one, I love art, I love wine. And I thought, well, if I can have a business in my retirement where I can, legitimately take business trips where I'm going to source wine and art, life couldn't get any better.
Oh, all right. We're going to have to just totally take a left turn on this, because now this has turned into a publicly recorded business strategy session. We're about to split up North America. Okay. Wow. That's okay. So all right. So ice wine and art are not just, these are things that you obviously have spent more time in than me. So, all right, let's test the knowledge here. Have you heard of, I think it's called Passport to Sonoma?
No.
Okay. So I'm told, I haven't yet been able to attend because by the time I wanted to, this thing called COVID happened. But you buy this literally a passport booklet, and you get access to all of these wineries, and you get the behind the scenes tour, and you get these VIP experiences and these fancy dinners, right, with the owners and the higher, how the higher ups. And then you get to buy these bottles at wholesale price. So I have a buddy who either he or somebody in his family goes out every year, and they literally ship crates back to Chicago. And I'm not going to say that I've benefited from this said crate, but I have. Spoiler alert. So do you do trips like that where you'll pick a region of the world and just go spend time bouncing from vineyard to vineyard?
Not yet, but that's my future plan.
Yeah, love it.
But so we've got in Ontario, it's actually a little more difficult to get wine into the province. So we have what's referred to as the LCBO, which is the Liquor Control Board of Ontario. Mm. And they are pretty much the gatekeepers of alcohol sales in the province. And so unless there's a few exceptions for vineyards, wineries to sell their own wine. And there are now allowed, there's a couple of wine-only stores. And in the last few years, we have a new provincial government that has finally allowed, in limited circumstances, the ability to buy wine and beer in certain selected grocery stores, which is all very new to Ontario. So it's currently difficult to sort of import wines. But if you're a wine broker, you can import wines. But otherwise, you're stuck with the LCBO.
We're coming up with so many business ideas, Crystal, I'm telling you. All right, what about from an art perspective? Have you incorporated that into your travels or done traveling for it? I'm thinking, have you been to the Louvre, for example?
Yes. And so I guess maybe the way to put it is that whenever I travel, I do go to make sure I go see art galleries, both the bigger commercial ones and, some of the smaller shops. And one of my favorite places.
Yeah, I was going to say, plug something off the beaten path.
Well, I'm not sure how off the beaten path it is. It's a small town in the south of France called Saint Paul de Vence.
Okay.
But it is one of those old historic towns, where streets are, narrow, you're on a cliffside. So, it seems like you're forever walking up a hill.
Yeah. That's where, who was that artist who had the waterfall that actually never stopped? It was just water was constantly falling. That's the way walking through medieval villages in Europe is, except you feel like you're always going uphill.
So, but yeah, St. Paul de Vence in the south of France. And so, in my mind, that will be one of the places that I would go visit, looking for art to import.
Oh, I love it. That's wonderful.
I'll get back to art as at some point, though I'm mid-50s now. So fortunately, retirement from law is probably, 10, 15 years away. But it's not an eternity.
not an eternity. It'll probably feel like it's here tomorrow. That's for sure. So, all right, Crystal, I'd love to hear a little bit more about, am I saying it right? Is it Heuristica?
You are saying it right. Correct.
Yay. First, before we go further, who has the accents, Canadians or Americans?
We all do.
We all do. I know. That's true. I wish.
Apparently,
Yeah.
the Canadian accent is what is often what I understand, and I could be totally wrong, but they teach broadcasters so that it's as close to a non-accent as possible. But you ask an American, and I have an accent.
See, that's funny you say that because I recently heard that that's Nebraska. So Stephen Colbert on his old show in Comedy Central, he said that broadcasters are taught to speak like they're from Nebraska because it sounds like they're from nowhere, which is partially true. And I thought, well, that seems unfair to Nebraska. Yeah.
You know what? That's probably right, because I'm sure if you put an average Canadian, and the Quebecers will have an accent, and Newfoundlanders will have an accent, and people from PEI have an accent to me. But I'm sure if you put a pool of people from, sort of central Canada with Nebraska, we'd probably all sound the same. Although I'll say a boot.
I had some PEI mussels the other day, by the way. Quite delicious. Okay, so first of all, Heuristica, I want to hear about the business name. Where did that come from? What does it mean? And then tell us a little bit about, what your firm does.
Sure. So I'm just going to, because on our website, we've actually got, give me one moment.
Yeah. I'll take a sip of the dessert wine and just let it, what was the word? Swirl?
Yes, let it swirl. Hey. So my business partner, Brian Powell, is the one who came up with the name. I will give him full kudos for that. And heuristic comes from the Greek word heuristein, meaning to discover.
Oh, that's clever.
I didn't come up with it. I think it was very clever. And so, heuristic pertains to, so the definition of a heuristic is the process of gaining knowledge or desired result through learning, problem solving, and intelligent analysis drawn from experience. And so we just put an A on the end of it to make it a name.
Oh, I thought you were going to make it to be like Canada, like CA. Like
no, but I like that story better. I may borrow that. No, so and actually it comes from, truth be told, we've got a really bizarre regulatory system in Canada for lawyers as compared to the US. And the Law Society of Ontario, when I first registered the firm, as a professional corporation, they called me up, and it was just, we just picked Discovery Counsel. And they called me up and said, well, you can't have that name. And I said, well, why not? And they said, well, it's too particular. And I said, well, okay, but isn't that a good thing on a name? And so they said, no, you can't have it. You need to have it as a name, Discovery Counsel. And they said, well, we'll call it O'Donnell Discovery Counsel. And I said, no, I don't want to do that, because, this firm isn't about me. Like, this is a firm. It's going to, it's bigger than me as an individual. Right. And so I said, okay, so as long as I come up with a name, you'll be fine. And they said, yes. And so I said, okay, well, careful what you wish for. So my business partner came up with the name. And so we provided the name to the Law Society. And of course they come back and they said, well, what does that mean? And so we gave them the definition of heuristic. And I said, well, we just put an A on the end of it. It's a name. You said so long as we had something Discovery Counsel, that it would meet your requirements. So that's how we ended up with Heuristica.
Oh, I love it. So I was thinking like of heuristics, right? Like the process of learning, but I like that it means like to discover in Greek. That's way better.
Heuristein. So the original Greek word is Heuriskein.
Okay. All right. Got it.
Yes, it actually fit perfectly for what we do.
Yeah.
And so what do? We're a law firm that focuses entirely on the discovery. And I leave the E out of it because as you and I know, the reality is all evidence, unless it's oral testimony or physical evidence, a handwritten note, it's electronic. And so we're all just dealing with the discovery of information.
As a non-attorney and non-paralegal who's transitioned into this space during COVID, I've just kind of thought it's funny that people still refer to it as EDiscovery. I'm like, well, I mean, it kind of, like you said, like it's 99%, right? I mean, but then I thought, well, I still call it, I check my email. So I guess that's a thing.
I was going to say, same, we all call it email, but, other than that, it's probably one of the few remaining areas where people are stuck with the E. And I think it's because, lawyers we're hard to change, I'm a lawyer. I can say that and fully own it. So I would say that for me, the biggest challenge we have is change management with lawyers.
Oh, okay. Tell me more. Unpack that a little bit. Because you took away, I was going to tee up. I was like, get on your soapbox. Tell me what's on your mind about, discovery / EDiscovery / the practice of law. But you spilled the punch. I love it.
Well, and I think I've been doing this. So I was a regular sort of traditional, litigation attorney, as you would have called me, for the first 12 years of my career. And then I switched, into the EDiscovery space. And, the rules in Ontario changed in January. It will be 12 years ago. And I would still have to say the overwhelming vast majority of lawyers, and I'll say on both sides of the border, really actually don't know enough about electronic evidence to competently be giving clients advice on how to work with that evidence. And, I think, I've got lots of different policy roles. And from my perspective, part of that challenge comes from how we're trained as lawyers. And so from the moment we start law school, we're taught to look at precedent. We're taught to look backwards. And when you spend 3 years being trained, well, what you're going to do next is what was done previously. It's a real, legitimate shift in the way that people think. And lawyers were risk adverse by nature or ingrained to us. We manage risk and analyze risk for clients. And combine that, I think, with how our legal systems are set up to look backwards. We're not going to be the first industry that incorporates new stuff. And so,
it's fascinating. I've heard various strains of that, but I've never heard it articulated quite so in such a pithy, succinct manner. I think that you really hit the nail on the head. You're conditioned to look backwards, right? And by definition, change management is moving into an unknown that we're trying to put more structure around.
Yes,
that's really interesting.
And as lawyers, we're trained to raise red flags and identify the problems and identify the issues. And so you combine, that approach with a process that is known it's never going to be perfect. And I think that's when, a lot of lawyers who you combine it with, lawyers don't like admitting when they don't know because they think it's a sign of weakness.
Yeah.
With our tendency to be risk adverse and look backwards. And all of a sudden we are trying to get them to embrace, all new way of an entirely new way of thinking with new technology that is ever changing.
Yeah.
It's like just when they think they get their bearings on how to do something, the technology has, zoomed by them. And all of a sudden we're telling them, yeah, I know what you did 10 years ago seems new, but that is actually that is now outdated. And this is what you need to do now. And so I think the ever constant change is also problematic. Lawyers like certainty. They want the comfort of knowing I know this stuff. And so I think that's where we get a lot of tension is the unknown.
And the irony, right, coming from the MBA side of the fence is that we also don't like to admit when we don't know something, but we like to point the fingers at the lawyers when we're told no and those red flags are too red. Oh, man. Well, Crystal, this was so great. Thank you so much for coming on the show. How can people reach out to you if they want to get a hold of you? So
our website, heuristica.ca, and, my the email address is, C.O'Donnell at Heuristica. Actually, no, sorry, discoverycounsel.ca. That's, we go back to the original domain. Our name wanted to be Discovery Counsel. So we didn't even put Heuristica in our email domain.
Too funny. All right. Well, it was so good to speak with you. Thanks so much for coming on.
Likewise. Thank you so much.